Welcome back, everyone, to Let the Journey Begin. I am your host, Jason Waller, alongside my co-host, Hillary Roberts. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Yeah, you doing good?
I'm doing great. I got to swim with your sweet daughter and Damon's sweet daughter.
We had a great time. We had a bunch of people over in the program. There were a bunch of sober people hanging out, doing a pool party. I think my wife was the only one that was not sober. I mean, she was sober, but she's the only one that was not actively sober in a program.
Damon and
you're right.
Damon and Christina.
There's a couple others. Yeah. Whatever. It was still a great time. My daughter loves you.
I love her. That's my baby. I have two nieces from my two brothers from another mother, and I just love it. And she was jumping at me. I was going to save my hair, but she wanted to jump in the pool at me, and I couldn't resist.
No, you're so good with kids. You're so amazing with them. Speaking of, are you going to have some kids of your own?
I'm hoping to, but I'm going to talk to our guest that we're going to have on today to ask her some questions, since she has a baby that's like less than 2 years old. So I really have major questions. I can't trust what you have to say, so whatever.
What do you mean? You love my daughter? Okay. I see how it is. All right. Anyways, well, look, also for you guys that are listening that follow, the movement that RSF is trying to create with, those struggling with mental health, trauma, substance abuse. We have an event coming up here on the 5th here in Newport Beach.
We do.
Very excited. Our very good friend Terry is so generous donating their boat, and we're going to have an intimate gathering where hopefully we're going to have some people come on, share the word of what Red Songbird's all about, what we're doing, spread the message, but, also procure dollars to allocate through scholarships and help more people. So
that's right.
Very excited about that coming up.
Well, I do want to say, even though I bust his chops, and you guys will hear me do that from time to time, and he busts mine, when I have gone over to Jason and Ashley's house, they are amazing parents, just amazing. And just watching you guys with your kids, I mess with you, but no, I just watch in wonderment how fabulous you guys are. And the other night when we had everybody and you're holding baby Wyatt, and and your daughter runs around, Daddy, look, Daddy, look. It's just so sweet. And you're building houses with her and doing all that stuff at your place.
I appreciate that.
You guys, every so often when I just pop and go, pa-pow, that's just because he's my brother.
That was a very nice squirrel moment. We were talking about going on a boat parade, and then I get talked about how my daughter is so. I love it, though. I'll take it. So, well, look, enough about us. We'll keep you guys posted on the events. Thank you, Hillary, for that. I'm excited to have our guest on here today and talk about, it sounds like there may have been some holiday struggles and some stuff that we can definitely talk about and encounter, because, again, Christmas is coming up. It's around the corner, and then we got New Year's.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, but fortunately, these holidays don't go away, right? And it's coming up with better options and solutions for us to come through. So, Hillary, without further ado.
So we have somebody who is fairly new in her sobriety, somebody who had suspected for years she had a problem, but recently gathered the courage and decided enough is enough. Today we are joined by Kristin Candelore, host with 1,000 Hours Dry.
Yeah, Kristen, welcome. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, we had a couple minutes to talk a little bit prior to the show, and we got to get a little bit of information, some insight. But before we get into some of your story, and I really want to make sure we touch on some of the stuff that you talked to us about prior to the show. But before we do that, I would love to know, what did Kristen want to be when she grew up?
So, I've listened to the show, so I knew, I thought about this question, and the only thing I can remember wanting to be when I was really little was a teacher. And I think that's just because, you're surrounded by teachers, and it just, seems like a cool job when you're a kid. But as I got older, I always really loved being around people. So I studied hospitality management in college, and I landed in the restaurant industry, and I have been doing that for as long as I can remember. My first job was hostess, server, bartender, and just kind of worked my way through almost every job in the restaurant industry. So that's where I still am.
Well, I just love that you're on here, because we have not, the restaurant industry has so much alcoholism and drug addiction. Mm-hmm. And so I just and other stuff too, but it's just, it's so great that you're on here to shine light and to be that example. And I understand that you have 10 months sober now.
Almost. It'll be 10 months, December 22nd.
Okay, girl, we're rooting for
Yeah.
you. I believe that you're going to get there. I can believe you're going to get there.
Yeah, you will for sure. And I am really stoked that you're here, and it's awesome to have people with neuro sobriety time come on here to really shed some light and really talk about the vulnerable times, right, and the things that we've gone through. But before we get there, going back to what you wanted to be, obviously you've landed in something that you said that you love, being around people and wanted to pursue that, but there was from what I hear, a little bit of a rocky road along this path, correct? And do you mind just diving into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, I think my entire adult life really knew that I didn't drink like everybody else drank. I knew that I had addiction throughout my family, but I never had anything that directly affected me. Like
Talk to me about that a little bit real quick, about you didn't drink like anybody else drank. What do you mean by that?
So I was always the one that people came to if they wanted to drink. I was like the go-to drinking buddy, especially in college. Like that's when it really got, because, you're in college, there's specials on Tuesday night, there's specials on Thursday night, and then you have the weekend. So it's like, there's always a reason to go out and drink. And if I wasn't going out and drinking, I was getting a bottle of wine and drinking by myself. And I just started to notice, like, my roommates aren't doing this. Nobody else is drinking the same amount that I am at the same frequency as I am. But it was never a problem. It was a problem internally because I knew that there was an issue, but it wasn't until my later 20s that I really started to take a closer look at it. I would say the first time that I really knew I had a problem was coming off of my best friend's bachelorette. It was actually out in California. It was an awesome time, but I, really lost control for the first time. And I remember coming home from that just feeling, completely defeated. And, I said to my boyfriend at the time, my now husband, like, I think I need to do something about this. Like, I really lost control on this weekend away. And from his perspective at the time, he's like, well, it was a bachelorette party. You drank too much on a bachelorette party. It's not, it's not the end of the world. Which from an outsider's perspective, I can definitely see where he was coming from. But again, internally, I knew what I did was not normal. And I was with a group of 15 girls and, nobody else was drinking to the extent that I was. But I was probably 24, 25 at that point. And I never stopped drinking. I mean, I tried here and there. I had short stints. I would go a month here, a month there. But ultimately, that anxiety of feeling like I was drinking too much and wanting to stop after a month not drinking would go away. And I would think, all right, it wasn't so bad. I'm going to drink again. And that continued for a long time. And then I had a baby during the pandemic, which was challenging for a lot of reasons. I was struggling with my drinking, my mental health, before getting pregnant pretty seriously. That was the first time I, sought therapy over it, and started talking about, the fact that I was worried about my drinking, and I was struggling with depression at the time. And then I found out I was pregnant, which was a huge surprise. But it was amazing. And being pregnant for me was sort of a Band-Aid, to all of the problems that I was having. Somebody who suffers from depression, sometimes they say when you're pregnant, you feel opposite effects. So you feel very euphoric and very happy during your pregnancy. And that happened to me 100%. I was able to stop drinking during my pregnancy. I no longer felt depressed. My anxiety was essentially gone. I just felt wonderful for 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And it really kind of threw me for a loop because I, hadn't felt like that consistently really ever. So, my daughter was born actually 8 weeks early. So she was premature. She was born in February of 2020. So right before things with COVID really kind of blew up.
Yeah.
We were in the NICU for a month. So we were out of the NICU March 20th, which was when things started shutting down. That morning, my husband and I were told only one of us could visit her at the hospital. So things were really just starting to really get real at that point. And the first couple of months home with her, I started slowly struggling again. We were quarantined, so we were home just like you guys were every day. It started slowly. I started drinking wine with my husband at night because we were quarantined and we were home with a newborn, and that was stressful, and I wasn't pregnant anymore, so I could have a drink.
So I have a question for you real
Yeah.
quick, like being pregnant, and it's not like, it's incredible that you were able, once you got pregnant, that, basically the obsessions, it seemed like, were lifted. And obviously it helps knowing that you shouldn't be drinking when you're, when you're pregnant and you're carrying a child. But after you had the baby, 9 months had gone by, right? And again, was there a motivating factor though that was like, because it seems like things were going really good. And again, I'm trying to differentiate right now between like the difference between being abstinence of drugs and alcohol versus actually living in recovery. So can you talk about, kind of, what was that? Was there that triggering effect? And did you kind of look back and be like, God, I haven't been drinking for a while. Why am I even wanting to start up again?
Yeah, definitely. So looking back now, I can confidently say that I was suffering from postpartum depression. I didn't realize it at the time. And I think a really tricky thing about postpartum is it can present in so many different ways. And the only thing that I had really ever heard about postpartum depression was, not feeling a connection to your baby. I heard all these stories about women having babies and not wanting to spend time with them or hold them or feed them. And I didn't feel any of that. I felt incredibly connected to my daughter. I wanted to spend every single second with her. So even though I knew that depression was creeping back in, I didn't really think that it was postpartum, just because I did have such a strong connection to her. And, I could easily say it was COVID, it was the quarantine, it was having a newborn, it was all of these things that made me drink. But ultimately, I know that I'm an alcoholic, and I would have drank no matter what. If it wasn't a pandemic when I had my daughter, I would have drank again for a different reason. But the thing for me about the postpartum depression was that it really brought out what I feared my drinking could always be. Before I had my daughter, I drank too much, definitely. I drank frequently, but I didn't really consider myself an alcoholic. I wasn't like drinking first thing in the morning. I wasn't going to work under the influence. I, have an amazing husband. I had a great job. So things were going well for me. I kept it, under control in a way.
Can I ask you a question on that? I just want to be very candid with this, right? And again, it's just, we're trying to educate everybody that's listening here. And, in your 20s, right, there was times where you'd identified like, man, I may be drinking too much and, I may be struggling, and then time had gone on and, but looking back, because I think oftentimes people look at like, hey, I struggle with alcohol. I have to be, not showing up to work. I have to be, my life has to be totally in shambles. I have to be arrested. I have to have these types of things there. But do you really think that you didn't struggle with alcoholism prior to that? Because I mean, like maybe I'm getting a little bit of a mixed signal from that. I don't know if you.
That's a really good question. I always struggled, 100%. I always worried about my drinking. I obsessed over it. I mean, my entire adult life, I think from high school on, if I wasn't drinking, I was thinking about drinking. I was thinking about if I drank too much the night before, or when was I going to be able to drink again? Or just my mind was so preoccupied 24/7 with something having to do
because
with alcohol.
I learned that something that Kayla, a mutual friend of ours, is talked to me about, is even just looking at the our relationship with alcohol. And what you were saying though is because it is so misconstrued. whether we struggle with alcoholism or not, just because of what's going on in our life. And I think a better way to almost look at this, and a question that people can ask themselves out there, is this really adding or subtracting from the beautiful life I have to live, right? Because you don't have to have this typical standard of what an alcoholic looks like, all the way from, like I said, getting arrested to being homeless under the bridge. That's not necessarily the case, right? There's a lot of people that are actually very high functioning alcoholics that don't have any of that. And that's why I'm wanting to bring up this conversation, because we've never talked about this specific situation on this show yet. And I think it's really, really important, because because I think what I heard you say in the beginning is like, hey, look, I really struggled with alcohol, but at the end of the day, things I was still managing. I was able to look at my successes. I was able to look at my relationships, and things were going good, but underlying, I was still really struggling, but it didn't really get worse until the postpartum, which, don't get me wrong, that's a super serious thing. And that's something I can't even talk on. I've seen so many women that have gone through that, but I think it's something really important to look at, is because we can deflect often, and people that may be listening that, are deciding whether, if I struggle or I don't struggle. I think it's like, if you think you're struggling, it's probably something to look at, right? And it's deeper than that. And I appreciate this is kind of off topic of how we do it. This has just brought up such a really, really cool conversation.
Yeah, it's an important point. And that's something that I struggled with a little bit too, when I started telling friends and family that I had decided to get sober. And with that, admitting that I have a problem. I'm not getting sober because I want to lose weight. I'm getting sober because I have to. And a lot of the responses that I got were that, you didn't end up in the hospital. You didn't hurt anybody. You didn't go to jail. And that was difficult for me, because it doesn't matter that I didn't go to jail. The bottom that I hit, it may as well have been jail, because for me, it couldn't get any worse. And I think the other important thing to go off of you saying, if you think that you struggle, you probably do. And if I didn't stop drinking when I did, I eventually would have gone to jail. I eventually would have hurt somebody or hurt myself. Alcoholism, what I've learned about it in these last 9 months is that it just grows. So, the further down the road you continue, the worse things get.
So let me ask you this. You're talking about, so what was that moment of clarity? What was that moment when you're like, I got to do something about this?
So, during the pandemic, my husband and I moved. We had a lot of change. He was starting a new job. We were leaving the city, and, like I mentioned before, my drinking just escalated. I mean, it went from, 5 o'clock drinking to 3 o'clock drinking to, I couldn't get through the day without it. It was what I had always worried about in my head. Like, what would I look like if I was a real alcoholic? It was that. So I was drinking first thing in the morning. I was lying to my family constantly. It was the darkest time of my life. But to speak on the turning point, was my daughter's birthday. So I had been trying to stop drinking. Desperately, like on my own. I got to a point where I just really I kept telling myself, like, I'm going to get this under control before I have to tell anybody, because it's so bad that I'm terrified to tell the truth. And Jason, that's when I reached out to you. Like a lot of people who are struggling do, I found myself drunk, going to sleep one night and just thinking, like, I don't know what to do. I need help, and I don't know where to get it. And, I see on your Instagram all the time that you're open about your recovery, and Red Songbird, and, reaching out to you was really that first step, and hearing back from you and getting contact information for a treatment center. I didn't stop drinking when I heard back from you immediately, but it did open my eyes to see that there was help out there, and there really were other real people who have gone through what I was going through. So that was the first step. Although, like I said, I did continue to drink. I just could not get out of the circle of drinking all day, waking up, feeling absolutely mortified. And the only thing that would make me feel normal again was to drink again.
Yeah.
So in the days leading up to my daughter's birthday, I had 5 days sober. My husband had asked me, please don't drink at her birthday. Like, you're doing good. keep it up. And I couldn't. I went into her birthday party, hoping that I would be able to stay sober. But I couldn't. And I drank, and I essentially, I may as well have not been there. I was not there for her first birthday mentally, physically I was there, but I was, desperately trying to hide it, which at this point I was doing a terrible job. I was not hiding it anymore. I mean, I thought I was, but I wasn't. And the day following her birthday was the same cycle of waking up thinking, what am I doing? Like, I have an amazing daughter, an incredible husband who is staying by my side through a very, very difficult time. And like, what am I doing to them? And I drank again because I could not even think about walking downstairs and facing that next day. So that day, I would describe as my bottom. And I would love to say that I woke up that morning and said, enough is enough. I didn't stay sober for my daughter's birthday. I'm going to stop drinking. But I'm going to be honest, it wasn't like that. I continued to drink to numb the anxiety and the embarrassment. And later that day, my husband said, we need to do something about this. You need to tell somebody what's going on, and you need to get help. And so that day I shared somewhat honestly about what I was experiencing with close family. It has taken months for me to really open up and tell the full truth of what I was going through.
Yeah.
But that day, I did say, I'm drinking too much. I think I have a problem. I need to get sober. And so that was the last day that I drank. So February 21st. So the 22nd is my sobriety date.
Did you reach out to people in recovery?
Yeah. So I was pretty lost in the beginning. I'm not gonna lie. I really didn't know where to go. Where I should have gone is treatment. I do want to say that because I think, as we all know, detoxing from alcohol can be very dangerous. And the struggle for me was that I wasn't ready to really be honest about how much I was drinking, but internally I knew how much I was drinking, and I knew that what I was about to do could potentially be really unsafe. So I should have gone to treatment. I didn't. I did stop on my own with the support of just close family. I took a couple days away with my parents, and those first few days were indescribably difficult. I really, I can hardly put it into words. They were very hard. And in those first few days, I went online. Things were still all virtual. So there wasn't a meeting that I could go to, or, somebody that I could have coffee with. People still weren't doing that at that point. So I did some meetings online. I did some virtual stuff. And really that was just because, again, if I wasn't going to go to treatment, I didn't really know where else to turn. So I did start with meetings. And those were just intimidating to me because I would call into them and people would speak and they'd have 20 years, they'd had 40 years of sobriety, and I had 4 days and that was just too much for me. So I went back on Instagram and I typed in #sober, and a whole new world, opened up for me. I found, obviously Red Songbird. I found 1,000 Hours Dry. I found Kayla. I found a lot of sober mom groups. So just this whole, social media world of people trying to get sober or are sober and trying to help other people that I didn't know that existed. And had I known, that there were other sober new mom groups out there, when I was struggling, that's where I would have gone.
No, I just love that because, see, this is even more putting in that #sober that you found us, that you found 1,000 Hours Dry, you found these other support groups. It's just fantastic. It's just fantastic. And see, that's the way social media works so positively. See, a lot of people don't like it because of all the battles, but you know, we don't have to attend every argument we're invited to. And I love social media for these reasons.
No, there's great components to it. So I would love just, I mean, and I appreciate the transparency about your, you know, so much hits home when you talk about missing the first birthday and, you know, physically being there, mentally checked out. You know, but you really hit home. This is a primary chronic and progressive disease. Like we talked about when you're in your 20s to going through what you went through. I mean, the disease was just building and building upon itself. And then you get thrown in a whole nother curveball. You know, it was rad to hear that you were able to, you know, have, you know, some change. And I think that was due to hormones and different things. Your body shifted and stuff when you were pregnant, but then the postpartum's a real thing, right? There's different options for different people. You know, not everybody has to go to treatment. Some people can find, you know, sobriety there. Some people find sobriety in a lot of different areas. So with you going away with your parents, finding some of these support groups and stuff like that and utilizing social media for the positive, how were you able to do some of the deeper work though, if you don't mind me asking through that process?
Yeah. Still something that I'm working on for sure. And I think, you know, the other thing about these social media groups they were so helpful to me and they really like got me started on my journey. But something that I also found along the way was that not everybody in those, you know, sober groups are necessarily addicts. I started listening to podcasts and reading books and, you know, watching Instagram stories. And at one point along the way, I heard someone say, you know, that they would have a glass of champagne at a wedding to celebrate a toast. And when I heard that, it scared me a little bit because I know now in my sobriety that I could never do that. And that's amazing. You know, if you can do that, then that's great.
More power to you.
Yeah, that's not my sobriety.
Yeah, me neither.
No.
But it made me want to find more support because, you know, I know that I can't relate to a person like that. If I had one glass of champagne, it'd be way more than that. So that's what kind of brought me back to, you know, looking into just more long-term support. Because although 9 months feels like a huge win and a long time, you know, looking at the road of forever, it's very small. So, you know, things that I do to stay sober right now, like I know I mentioned earlier, it was a struggle to really get open and honest about my struggle. So that's something that's really helped me stay sober is just opening up little bits at a time, about, you know, what it was really like. 1,000 Hours Dry has been a great outlet for that, you know, jumping on their Instagram stories once a week and being able to share my story in little 4-minute increments, was less scary than, you know, something like this right off the bat. So honestly, you know, the thing that kept me sober in those first couple weeks was talking about it, writing about it, and just trying to just release everything that I was hiding, if that makes sense.
Well, and I love, see, right now you have 9 months and there's going to be some gals that have that 4 days that you had and they can't see, like I have 24 years and they can't see that just like how you felt. So those gals that are feeling now what you felt when you attended some of these other sober groups, you can now be that support to them and reach out to them and say, hey, you know, I know that seems unthinkable or unreachable or whatever, but I can tell you this is what I've done to get this far.
Yeah. I hope
that's more attainable to them.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, you know, I wanted to start talking about this because there's so much shame around addiction, we know, but there's also a lot of shame around postpartum depression. I mean, people don't talk about it. People don't realize it's happening to them when it's happening to them. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that. I mean, there were days where I couldn't even get myself to brush my teeth. And when I think about that now, I think, how did I not know that I was struggling? You know, like I couldn't, you know, taking a shower, brushing my teeth, just like regular everyday things were so just physically too much for me. And now I look at that, I'm like, I would go days without brushing my teeth. Like that's disgusting.
No,
And
but
how did
it's
I
real
not?
though.
It's
Yeah.
real. I mean, it is. And it's just scary to think that even though that was happening to me, I still was just living in this denial that, you know,
What were
I
some of
was
the things you
okay.
were doing to help with the postpartum? I mean, how'd you get through that part?
So initially, so I had, like I mentioned before I got pregnant, I was seeing a therapist, about my drinking and just about my anxiety and depression in general, something that I always struggled with. So I started seeing a psychiatrist, and to be honest, in the beginning, I was just going through the motions with those appointments. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they again were virtual, so I wasn't going in to see anybody, and I was just living in such denial. I mean, I would call in, I would say, things are getting better, I'm feeling good, and talk to you next month. And that went on for a while. I would say probably 4 months of not being honest with her, until after my daughter's birthday. And then, that next appointment, I said to her, I haven't been honest, and this is really where I'm at. And now I actually have, I think I had 6 days at that point. And at that point we kind of started over because the quote unquote work that we had done before wasn't going anywhere because I was still drinking, and wasn't really fully recognizing the postpartum. So medication has played a part in my story. I mean, pre-pregnancy, I've been on medication for anxiety most of my adult life. It's something that I've just always struggled with. And therapy. I mean, the two put together, it does work. I think the really tricky thing about it though is it takes such a long time to get into a groove of therapy that if you're depressed, like if you're in a depression or in active addiction, trying to find a therapist that works for you is so hard. I mean, it's hard on a normal day, and then add in, a real struggle. It's really, really difficult because you really can't decide whether or not a therapist works for you after one session. I mean, right? You have
Right.
to give it a couple weeks or a couple months. And that's also going to be based on what you can afford, because mental health help is not cheap.
Yeah.
So, that was a big struggle, finding people that, that worked for me, and committing to that journey, because it takes a lot of work. And, I wasn't really able to put the work in until I eliminated the alcohol.
Yeah. No, for sure. You can't heal until that's all there. And I think you bring up another huge point is like, even with the medication, I've been on medication for most of my adult life as well. But it's one thing to take the medication to help with some of the symptoms and stuff like that. But it's also imperative that you have the therapist and or the psychiatrist there to do the work, because the medication is not going to sustain itself. So you got to put forth the
Right.
work. And I think it's really cool. It's just rad. I love how you bringing this back from reaching out, whether it was to me in the beginning, you know what I mean? But you took the initial steps. And I think for anybody that's out there, that's something that's really important, is it is taking that initial step, and it's can be very fearful in the beginning, but that is the first step to having to have that worst day of your life be that last of your worst days, if that makes sense. And you did that process, and look at where you are today. I mean, you had to go through a couple of bumps, and you had to experience some things that are really hard and trying. And again, like I said, there are some monumental things in our lives that we, due to our addiction, that we had to miss. But it can be a really important learning experience, and make sure that doesn't ever happen again. Or it's something that, we can dwell on. And unfortunately, things can get worse if we don't take the time that we need to take to make those better. So just really appreciate you. This is actually one of my favorite shows we've done, just because of the way that it was conducted. And maybe this is something that we can look at about how we can conduct shows moving forward, just a much more open dialogue around this, because I think it's really important about what you went through. And there's a lot of people I know for a fact that are going through what you're going through, especially around postpartum and, with addiction, and just looking at it a different way. So really appreciate that.
So we have a question we ask, and if you were to give our listeners one action for the day, what would it be?
Oh man. I mean, I would have to say just getting honest. For me, that was the biggest part of both my struggle and my recovery. And I think, in the beginning, especially if you're still struggling, it doesn't really matter who you decide to get honest with, just say out loud to somebody, what you're going through. And it will continue to grow from there, because until you say it out loud, it's just so easy to continue to bury. So, in an active struggle, I would say that's the first step. And then, an action of the day for recovery is just continue, looking at yourself honestly, and, look at your struggles and grow from them, and help, use them to keep you sober, but also, try to move on from them too. But I think just that honesty piece is so hard. But it's just such an important piece of recovery.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your transparency and authenticity and your honesty.
No, it's awesome. Is there, if people want to reach out to you or connect with you, is there a place they can connect with you on like social media or?
Yeah, Instagram is definitely the best place. So Candelore_Kristen is my Instagram handle. And then I'm on 1,000 Hours Dry on their parents page on Mondays. So I'm always going to be linking ways to contact me there. And then I'm hosting on their Canada page on Thursdays. So, if anybody wants to reach out to me on Instagram, I will share my email, phone number.
I love it.
Awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.